Greenhouse warming theory is rapidly becoming the most expensive mistake ever made in the history of science. Video 12. Climate scientists refuse to face the reality that greenhouse warming theory is mistaken. Al Gore claims that Mark Twain quipped, "What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so." These immortal words explain precisely the 2019 crisis in climate science. Climate scientists know for sure that increases in greenhouse gas emissions are the primary cause of observed global warming. Meanwhile, new observations and new insights show that greenhouse warming theory is physically impossible, as explained cogently at physically-impossible.com and in Video 10. Climate scientists, being so convinced that they know for sure, refuse to even consider the slightest possibility that there could be the slightest mistake with greenhouse warming theory. Meanwhile, governments worldwide are preparing to spend tens of trillions of dollars to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. These efforts will almost certainly be a monumental waste of money, and they are highly likely to disrupt the availability and increase the cost of energy that we all depend on to drive our economies and our quality of life. The fourth National Climate Assessment, released by the United States Global Change Research Program in late 2017, concludes, "It is extremely likely that human activities, especially emission of greenhouse gases, are the dominant cause of observed warming since mid-20th century." A second conclusion is that for the warming over the last century, there is no convincing alternative explanation supported by the extent of the observational evidence. I've interacted with two of the three coordinating lead authors of this assessment for many years. I wrote all three when this report was in draft form to explain that both conclusions are demonstrably mistaken. It is physically impossible for greenhouse gases to cause significant warming, as explained cogently at physically-impossible.com. Secondly, ozone depletion theory explains the details of warming since the mid-20th century and throughout geologic history far more directly, far more precisely than greenhouse warming theory. Climate scientists have underestimated the thermal effects of ozone depletion because of a fundamental misunderstanding of the physics of radiant energy. I have explained these conclusions to them and to many other leading climate scientists since 2015, in my book, in many papers, in numerous talks, and on detailed websites. No climate scientist has provided any cogent criticism of my scientific conclusions. The sad reality is that nearly all climate scientists are simply not interested in considering the possibility that there could be any problem with greenhouse warming theory. They know for sure that greenhouse warming theory is greenhouse warming fact. The even sadder reality is that peer review is broken regarding any scientific paper that questions greenhouse warming theory. Scientists refuse to give private review. Journal editors refuse to send such papers out for review. They do not consider the possibility worth their time. As one of the lead authors explained to me, "Peter, there is no way that you could be correct and all the rest of us are wrong." I responded, "Can you give me a scientific reason?" He could not. It is only human to defend the consensus that thousands of scientists have worked hard for decades to develop. Max Planck, one of the fathers of modern physics, put it this way: "A scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die, and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it." With climate, however, we do not have the time to wait. World leaders, convinced by the broad consensus of scientists, are preparing to waste trillions of dollars trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. On April 18, 2016, I sent personal emails to more than 1,000 climate journalists and more than 2,000 top climate scientists, who contributed to the 2013 Physical Science Basis Report issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I asked them to click on a 13-minute video where I plead with scientists to recognize that there appears to be a significant problem with greenhouse warming theory, and that we scientists have a responsibility to society to be sure that the most up-to-date science is available to those setting public policy. No response. To date, that video, readily available on YouTube, has only been watched by 2,100 people. On November 12, 2015, I sent emails to a similar large list of reporters and scientists offering $10,000 from my children's inheritance to the first person who can demonstrate by experiment that warming observed since 1970 could be physically explained by the observed increase in carbon dioxide. No one has shown any interest, and no one has yet demonstrated by experiment that greenhouse warming theory is even physically possible. My offer still stands. Over the past 5 years, I've written to the leaders of numerous scientific organizations arguing that we need to bring back genuine scientific debate to climate science. None have responded seriously. I am the only scientist I know who has rented a booth in the exhibit hall of major national science conferences to discuss science. I have now interacted with more than 7,000 scientists in this way over 4 years at 4 annual meetings of the Geologic Society of America, 4 annual meetings of the American Geophysical Union, 4 annual meetings of the American Meteorological Society, and 2 annual meetings of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. This effort has led to some very interesting discussions. I've done more than 140 radio shows discussing climate change. One major problem is that climate scientists are tired of arguing with a very vocal minority of climate skeptics who claim that there has been no warming, or claim that observed warming is natural and certainly has not been caused by humans. Most climate scientists do not think these arguments by skeptics are based on sound science. Many of these skeptics have strong conservative and even libertarian political views against any type of government regulation. Some are funded by energy companies who also wish to limit government regulation. Climate scientists have thus come to assume that anyone questioning greenhouse warming theory must be one of those damn skeptics and should be ignored. Some scientists have even tried to penalize any skeptic or any journalist who describe the arguments from any skeptic not agreeing with the consensus. They blame the skeptics for warping the public mind, as documented in polls showing only 26% of Republicans believe Earth is warming mostly due to human activity, as opposed to 75% of all Democrats. The essence of human beings is not their ability to reason, but their ability to rationalize. From 1998 to 2013, temperatures did not rise very much, while concentrations of carbon dioxide kept increasing, suggesting the greenhouse warming theory may not be correct. This period became known as the global warming hiatus. Hundreds of climate scientists have written peer-reviewed papers arguing that this 15-year hiatus was statistically normal, that the climate system is complex, that there are many feedbacks that make it more complex, and that the long-term trend is still upward, and that warming will return with a vengeance. These arguments are all grasping at straws. The primary reason climate scientists are reluctant to consider what I am describing and documenting is because it involves a fundamental revolution in physics. This revolution could be the greatest revolution in the history of science, measured by its economic and political effects. I am showing, based on very straightforward observations of nature, that light, electromagnetic radiation, and heat are each a broad spectrum of frequencies of oscillation that travel through space via resonance, not as waves, not as photons. Max Planck in 1900 came very close to describing these conclusions, but he, along with all other physicists at the time, confuse brightness or intensity of radiation with energy of radiation. Even though Planck postulated that energy equals a constant times frequency, he saw this as a mathematical convenience and did not think about what was physically happening. It may take years for physicists to come to agree with what I have shown about radiation, because it has huge negative implications for quantum mechanics and particle physics. But again, my conclusions are based on very straightforward observations of nature that you and anyone else can make for yourself. A very large consensus of scientists is currently urging political leaders to spend trillions of dollars right now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I have shown very clearly that greenhouse warming theory is physically impossible. I challenge anyone in the world to try to find any significant problem with the webpage physically-impossible.com. This is not the time for scientists to stick their heads in the sands of consensus. It is time for them to debate the science, which in hindsight is remarkably clear. Ignoring reality is no longer scientifically, economically, or politically acceptable. Thank you.